Hi, I'm Mike Ryan. In our first video on the first American turquoise rush, we learned a bit about some of the importance of the different cultures of our First Nation people. Really, in the United States, we are really undereducated about our First Nation people. Generally, we have been taught stereotype, we know the Plains Indians and Custer's Last Stands and all of these kind of myths of the Wild West and these barbarous Indians. We've tended to either demonize First Nation people or to idealize them. Oh, they can do no wrong. They're just so wonderful. But of course, they're people. And they're a diverse people here before the colonial period, and they continue to have their own important culture and history. And we can learn a lot by studying that. And I've been fortunate to serve as a docent at the Wheelwright Museum of the American Indian, and that has really helped me to understand more about First Nation people and what a diverse set of cultures and history there has been. The way we review or regard our First Nation people would be similar to if we were looking at European history and saying, well, the Germans and the Italians are just the same. They're all the same. That would be foolish. And yet that's kind of the attitude we have for our First Nation people. And in the first video, part one, we saw how there was a confluence of different pueblos representing different language and culture here in the Santa Fe area, and they were very active in trade. We tell in Turquoise in America, part one, the Great American Turquoise Rush, 1890 to 1910, we tell about the first turquoise miners here, the prehistoric miners that we believe were the ancestral Puebloan. And they had a trading network all throughout the Southwest and also going down into Mesoamerica. You can read about that in part one. I want to follow up a little more about the important Pueblos in the Santa Fe area and their connection with turquoise. From about 1300 to 1600, Pecos Pueblo was a center of trade in the area. Really, if you're coming from the plains, there's a passageway to Taos in the north, and then you come down 70 some miles or so, and through the Glorieta Pass, going through Pecos and the confluence of the Pecos River and Glorieta Creek. There's another entryway there, and that has long been a important trade route. And as I said, from 1300 to 1600, Pecos Pueblo was the center of that. It was a large pueblo. There were probably as many as 1,500 people or so living there. And it was important because, as I said in the first video, we had the Towa, Tewa, and Keres Pueblos were trading, but we also had the Utes, Navajo, and Apache coming from the west, and we assumed Kiowa and Comanche coming from the plains. And the Kiowa and Comanche, especially the Comanche, they were trading further east with the Caddo people, the Wichita, and many people along in the Mississippi River area. So really, there was a lot of trade going on during that time period. We see here in this photo, which is at the museum at the cultural center there at the National Park at Pecos Pueblo at the ruins. And I encourage you, if you're in the Santa Fe area, do stop by and see that. It's really interesting. And we get an idea of what life was like in one of those pueblos. Then in the next photo, we get an idea, a representation of what that trade might have been like. The pueblo itself is up on a rise, and they go down into this plain, and that was where they would have the trade, because you didn't want to open your doors to potentially hostile trading partners. So it was nice to have them there a little distance away on the trading plane. And you can see some of the difference with the teepees coming from the Plains Indians, and the wigwams more of the would be more of the Apache representation. So we know there was a lot of trading going on there because of the excavations that were done by Kidder in the 1920s at Pecos Pueblo. San Marcos is 30, 40 miles away. And we know we assume that they were doing most of the mining there in the Cerrillos area. And as I said in the last video, that Pueblo thrived from about 1200 till it was abandoned in 1692 when the Spanish returned after the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. We have in the next photo, we see some artifacts that were dug up by Kidder during the excavation, the archaeological excavation of the 20s. And we see beads there. And then we see a very interesting shell, a shell with a tiny little piece of turquoise inlay. Now, we know where the turquoise came from, and we know that the shell, where it did not come from. It did not come from the Southwest. It had to have come from trading from coastal areas, either from the South, going to the Gulf of Mexico, or over to the Pacific. So there was a lot of trading of stone and shell taking place. So we have this interesting discovery, and we can assume here, we can imagine the San Marcos Indians who had gotten some shell and they decided, oh, wouldn't this turquoise look good in the shell? Putting it in that and say, hey, see if we can trade that for something over at Pecos at one of their trade fairs. So, as I mentioned, San Marcos was abandoned in 1692. You know, they had been active in the Pueblo Revolt, and from 1680, maybe they were thinking, maybe it's not a good idea for us to stay here because when the Spanish come back, they may not treat us very well. So they abandoned that Pueblo during that period. Now, you do a little speculation here. If you're going to abandon your home, where are you most likely to go? I would assume you would go to the closest relatives, the closest people you have who speak your language, and that would be at Cochiti and at Santo Domingo, known as Kiwa. We know in part one we have a whole chapter there about the mining activities of both the Cochiti and the Santo Domingo Indians there wanting to come back into what they considered their turquoise, getting caught for that. And that's a whole chapter in Turquoise in America, part 1, Indian Trespass. So if we assume that the San Marcos Indians had gone to Santo Domingo and Cochiti, it's not surprising at all to see that at Santo Domingo, they developed a tradition of beadwork. And also later on, and we see here, this is a photo of some early inlay that was done there at Kiwa. So there at Santo Domingo, that was kind of where the railroad first came in. They cut south through Lamy and cutting over. And so at Santo Domingo was where it met the Rio Grande. So that was a lot of contact, a lot of tourist contact there. And the Santo Domingo became famous for doing these chip inlay pieces. Later on, became very well known for doing beadwork, masterful beadwork by Charles Lovato and others. And here we see a beautiful bead necklace with a shell inlay that was really initiated by Angie Riano Owen. Just a wonderful bead maker and a master jeweler. And she's still working, and if you can get any of her pieces, I would really recommend it. But we see this inlay work in shell. Now, it's just my speculation, but as Philip and I have said, in history, sometimes you get the dots as close as you can, and then you make a reasonable speculation to connect them. So I'm kind of speculating that there is a real connection there between the old San Marcos mining at the San Marcos Pueblo and Santo Domingo.